When Disneyland opened to guests in 1955, it was unique because every one of the lands had a story. It was a story driven park, and few stories were as demanding and dynamic and inspirational as the stories of Tomorrowland. This was a world not based on frontier lands or fairy tales, it was based upon science and technology. And it had so much to offer. It had exhibits, and Utopia, which was the freeway of the future where you, even if you're young, could drive your own automobile. But Disneyland's Tomorrowland was missing something. And that's what this episode of Disney Journey is all about. It's about the rocket jets, Tomorrowland's very first thrill ride, and how it shaped Tomorrowland's future. Every single Disneyland has an icon at its base, whether it's a frontier fort, a castle, or a rocket ship. The reality about the TWA Moonliner, as strong as it was a passive object. It was not kinetic. And one thing that rocket jets provided was a kinetic activity that was a strong emotional and visual pull for that land. A common question that I always get, no matter if it's asked during a course that I'm teaching at CalArts or in a personal conversation, is how do you start imagining? How do you start to Imagineer? And the answer is always with a story. And in the case of Tomorrowland, you had one based on science and technology, even if the science part is a little shaky. I mean, thanking God for the atomic bomb is, well, a little doubtful. But Walt liked it, and he expressed that idea through television programs and books and magazine articles and artwork. I remember always carrying away with me the DNA of, oh, there's a genie. And so going to Tomorrowland to look at science and technology in all of its forms, whether it's airplanes or rocket men, that's something that was very, very appealing. The idea, though, is that I really wanted to be in a rocket. And I'd like to be one of these rockets, because each rocket for the rocket jets had a name. It was inspired in part by Dumbo, because Dumbo, he was hugely popular, if it even had a few bumpy starts. But it was popular. And so rocket jets was like a Dumbo all grown up, because it gave the guests something that Dumbo didn't give them, which was an angle. It was always fixed to the boom arm. This was a standard feature of the off-the-shelf ride that Disneyland purchased for Tomorrowland. It was made by a company in Germany near Munich called Kasper Klaas. They were an old company even back then, and they had a long history. The business of Kasper Klaas was in the design and manufacturing of carnival rides, especially for the traveling carnival. Now, these caught Disney's eye because they needed a flat ride, and they wanted something to extend and mimic the success of Dumbo, because everyone loved Dumbo. And they know they needed one like that, a Dumbo-like ride, an amusement ride, one that they could get very quickly. And Kasper Klaas just so happened to have one that they could use. They took this ride, they bought it, and quickly it was on its way to Anaheim, California. The Imagineers had an idea of what it should look like, but the reality of what it could look like and what it would look like were totally different. The reality is, when it opened, it was basically got a coat of paint, and it was popped down in an area that had been a planter. But it didn't matter, because when it opened, it was very successful. It had a great name, an evocative name, and people flocked to ride it. Kasper Klaas, the company, no longer makes rides, not for Disneyland or anyone else, but they are in the ride business. They today make automated parking systems, and you may have seen one of theirs in a movie. So in that way, in that lens, the company still is making rides, but you don't need a ticket book to ride it. Kasper Klaas was not the first company that Disney dealt with who had more modest beginnings. Both Vekoma and Zamperla started not making amusement park rides, and definitely not making them for Disney, but much more modestly. They've become today world-class leaders in the leisure industry. Guests had been piloting the rocket jets for many years when it was decided they'd have to go, because now was time for something new in Tomorrowland, a new Tomorrowland. And that meant the demolition crews moved in, and many of the classic opening day rides, shows, and attractions would fall under the axe. Many of the things that occurred are kind of sad looking back in the rear view mirror. But honestly, how many of us really ever went to Disneyland to set our watches by the clock of the world? It was all for a good cause, however, because the rocket jets got a new lease on life. And this is where I started to come into the picture. Because People Mover had a platform, and above it was the rocket jets. But in this iteration, there was only going to be one way to get to them, and it involved an elevator. Rocket jets reopened as part of the new Tomorrowland, and I recall how different they were. My first ride on the rocket jets, I didn't enter in the ground level, I entered in an elevator. And the elevator took me up all 1, 2, 3 stories. When the doors opened, I no longer saw this carny ride that was painted in a checkerboard pattern. No, now I saw a very sleek, modern white and black rocket ship. And around it were little rocket ships that I was soon to pilot one of them, high above Tomorrowland, 90 feet in the air. The decision to build the rocket jets in Anaheim was based on expediency, but it proved to be very, very successful. So when the time came to build the Magic Kingdom in Florida, of course, there would be a version of that ride, which changed names multiple times and survived, even to the point of building the new Tomorrowland based upon a future that never was. Here, well, the Orbitron Astro Orbiter was already on top of a platform, but it got a redress. And it's just a beautiful object to look at, even when it's still, because you can see it from all different angles. And when you're aboard it, you get to get into these wonderful little rockets that you personally get to pilot. And you circle around planets, and you get to see a great view of the Magic Kingdom. So you wonder, why don't they build another Astro Orbiter? And I'm so glad you asked, because whatever form it is, whether it's Starjets, Orbitron, rocket jets, the idea was so powerful that it was easily translatable around the world as far as the Disney parks were concerned. It went everywhere, and it was successful everywhere it went, even if it had a different name when it went there. It made a stop in Tomorrowland, in Tokyo Disneyland. This version of the ride was classically iterated from Florida, although it was a little bit different, because it was only on the second floor of a building that in Florida is on the third. For Euro Disneyland, which is today Disneyland Paris, the ride was totally reimagined. It even got a brand new name, that we all know it as the Orbitron. It was inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's drawings of the universe, and it served two purposes. In its location, before Space Mountain was built, it was the central hub, the central icon, the thing that was always moving, that would draw you in, which is one of the edicts of any good design, that something should draw you in, and you don't need an explanation of why. It just catches your eye, and it works on a very intuitive level. This ride was supplied by Zimprella, our good friends we talked about earlier, and they built it in Vicenza, Italy, and sent it up the streets to be installed there in Mondovili. And as I said, before Space Mountain, it was the central icon, and for the most part still serves that purpose even to this day. Next up, the ride made another trip, this one to Hong Kong Disneyland, and this one was inspired by the work of Bruce Bushman for not this park, but the original Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Because now you're not going to be in rocket ships. You're going to be in flying saucers. And the reason for that is the ride system is very similar to the land ride system. No matter which ride system was used, though, it does provide the same idea as all the other rocket jets. But proving there was still rocket fuel in the tank, this ride was going to make yet another journey to Shanghai Disneyland and their Tomorrowland. However, it was going to go with a very big difference because this Tomorrowland was unified in its idea. It was a garden, there were plazas, there was the Tron coaster as its centerpiece, and it was going to have not rocket jets, not flying saucers, not star jets even. Jetpacks is the name of the ride in Shanghai. And the idea is that you're going to be sitting in individual seats, and every two would have one boom arm that they could control the up and down on. And it functions very much like all the other ones, just in a different location. But there's one more that we should return to, and that one brings us back to Anaheim. The rocket jets, as admirable as their service had been to Disneyland, were of their time. They never could have been transformed into the Orbitron, which was the plan for New Tomorrowland, to put the Orbitron at the front door, on the hub. And as a result, they had to buy a new one. But that meant the old rocket jets was still on the platform, and so it fell to me as the creative director to figure out something to do with it. I looked at it, I stood on Harbor Boulevard and came back in the park and looked at it from different angles and realized with a project that really was highly constrained as far as money, we called it no-do projects back then, that I needed to think about something that was radically different. And so I took all the cladding off of the rocket ship and created this antenna on top of it. So now you had the tower, which was the old rocket jet's tower, and then you had an antenna on top of it. And the combination of the two meant that everything was now asymmetrical. And as a result, you had some emotional visual design impact. One small off-the-shelf German-made carnival ride has been in a Disney park since almost the opening day of Disneyland in Anaheim. It's gone around the world. It's changed in style, in name, in function, in location, but not in experience. In every single case, you, the guest, are empowered. Empowered to sit behind the controls of a rocket ship and pilot around an imaginary universe, to watch his planet spin by and people far, far below on the ground are looking up. Rocket jets proves that an idea can come from anywhere. It can be modest. If it's strong enough, it will survive, and it will thrive. My rocket's out of fuel, so we've landed here back at the Lost Canyon Spaceport. I'll have another new episode coming soon. In the meanwhile, please, like these great folk, consider becoming a supporter by becoming a channel member. These folk get new episodes before anyone else, and they now get exclusive bonus episodes with stories and video that I don't share anywhere else. So consider becoming a member. Also, consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell notification button to become aware when new episodes are released. Oh, and check the show notes below for information about my website and my other activities. Until the next time then, it's goodbye from Lost Canyon.